Hi, everyone. Welcome to day one of the Learn How to Study Abroad in America mini series. I am so excited that you are here and that you are interested in learning how to study abroad in America. So, for day one, what we're going to do is just start with the basics. So, as I've mentioned before on other videos, there are a lot of different components when applying to study abroad in America because our system is really large, as you would imagine, and there are so many different types of universities and colleges. So that is what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to talk about the basic types of colleges and universities here in America. Then we are going to just talk about what might be expected and the general rules of thumb that American students have followed for years as we have begun to look for colleges and universities. So this was steps that I took when I was looking back in the day and things that I know that students currently do. So we're going to go ahead and dive into day one now. Let's get started. So welcome to day one of the Learn How to Study Abroad in America mini series. I'm so excited to dive into this. Just a couple of things to point out. As I have done in the past, I do have some fun freebies coming up for this particular series, so definitely look into the description box to find any of those and get started with them. So what we're going to be doing in day one is just covering the basics of studying abroad in America for international students. There's a lot to cover throughout this series, but I definitely want to start at the basics because compared to a lot of other countries, there's so much to know about the educational system in America. And while I won't even get to all of it in this series, I'm going to be able to touch on a lot of it that is going to be important as you get started with your application. So if you ever watched any of my videos and even my Learn How to Study Abroad in 30 Days series, you know that I'm not the biggest quote person, so I will sprinkle them in. I know that they are really popular on social media. I don't do a lot of that, but I did feel that this particular, starting off with this series, that I think that it's important as you embarking on something like this. And I know that study abroad within itself can be very stressful, and especially if you're trying to move abroad for an entire degree, that is a huge step. So I really like this quote. It's actually from an unknown person. I love the unknown quotes. What do you think about unknown quotes? I like them because even though they're not attributed to anyone, it's like half the time those are the ones that are the most profound. So I like that people didn't put their name on it. They just put it out there. So maybe I'll try and do that too. I feel like I have a lot of profound quotes that I probably wouldn't claim, but that I've just put out into the atmosphere. So with this one, it says, even the greatest were beginners. Don't be afraid to take the first step. And so if you are willing to take the first step, you obviously are because you are here. And so embarking on this journey to study abroad in America is not going to be the easiest thing you've ever done. It is going to be a long process. You're going to have patience, but it definitely will be worth it if you feel like you're going to get a lot out of coming to the United States. So I'm excited to walk you through this particular journey and help you to learn more about what it will take to come to college or university here. So starting out with the basics of higher education here in the US, as you would imagine, if you've gone through and you've done your research and you've learned about America, most people know a lot of things about America, even more than a lot of Americans. And so you know that, first of all, we are a huge country. We are 330 plus million people. It's way more than that now, probably. And so a lot of places in Europe and other parts of the world can fit a few times within our country. So it is a vast place of 50 states, and there's a lot of ground to cover there. And so the first thing you kind of know is that we have nearly 6,000 colleges and universities here. So it spans the gamut from whatever you might be looking for, from people who have certain religious beliefs to people who have certain political beliefs, people who are looking for certain industries. There are big universities, there are small colleges, and we're going to get into all of that a little bit later. But there's so many options compared to a lot of other places where you may just have a few universities and they all may be of a larger size. And so there really is an opportunity here in the United States, like a lot of other things that we have going on here, to be able to find your people. And it could just be based on whatever region you decide to come to. It could be based on not just the college, but whatever type of department you end up being in as a part of your degree. So there are a lot of opportunities. Now, we are divided into the 4-year and the 2-year system. So I'm also going to be talking more about that in the coming days as I get into private universities, private colleges, community colleges, public universities, all of that great stuff. But there's the 4-year and the 2-year system. Now that is a bit different from some countries in the world, let's say like the UK, where they have the 3-year system for undergrad, and then most graduate programs are 1 year. Now, in this particular series, I am talking more for people who are looking for undergrad opportunities, although there will be some information that is sprinkled in for graduate opportunities. But for our undergrad, we have a 4-year and then a 2-year system. And the annual cost, I'm sure that you've heard a lot about the expensiveness of college here in the US. It is very expensive. The average cost, and this is from 2021, so this is recent. This is not from 1985. So the average cost of tuition alone is $16,570. But this is specifically looking at state schools or public universities, as we call them. And this particular number is saying that if you are an international student and you've received aid, that this would be the average cost of what you would be expected to pay on top of that particular aid. So we're going to get into that because there's a lot of different information around that, the fact that international students, along with out-of-state students as well, have to pay more money a lot of times to go to different schools. And so we're going to be talking about that too. And last but not least, as you can see here below, I talked about the fact that that's a thing that it may be surprising to you, but at most colleges and universities here, there is an extra fee for international students. And like I said, if you are an out-of-state student, let's say you're going from California to Arizona, then you may be going to a place, whether it's even a private school or a public school, where you could potentially have to pay more money. There's a lot of reasons behind that. And so just be aware of that that's not something that's uncommon. They're not just charging you extra because you're an international student. Students who are from the US, who come from other places, also have to pay extra as well. So colleges versus university. I really wanted to dive more into this because as someone who has lived all around the world and gone to different educational institutions around the world and kind of understanding the way that people talk about college and university, I think that when I just vision the UK, I think of it the most because college in the UK is a lot different than what we consider college here. So to start out, I just want to point out that college and university here culturally in the US is used interchangeably. So when someone says, when you hear, let's say an American friend say, oh, my best friend just went off to college, they could mean a college that is a private college. They could mean a private university like Yale University. They could mean a public university like University of Michigan. That is interchangeable in our culture. So when we think of college, typically we'll say like the college process, but it means as well that you could be applying to a university. So I just wanted to make that clear because in a lot of places, college and university are two defined things. And even though colleges and universities are different here in the US, they're completely different, and we'll go through that. That culturally, the way that we speak about it, if you say that someone is off to college, they could easily be off to a university, but we don't typically say, as they would in the UK or in different parts of Europe, oh, they went off to university. That's just not how we speak culturally, but they are interchangeably in the meaning, but they have very different sort of standards for how they are. So just kind of talking about the basic standards on a non-cultural level when you're actually speaking about the definitive things of college versus university here in the US. The population size. So the population size is one of the number one things that is sort of the distinguishing point between a college and a university. Most colleges in our country are a lot smaller. They can be very small. They can be between 500 students or less, like the college I went to, or they could be up to, let's say, 9,000 students. Whereas universities, a lot of times in total, will have 15,000, 17,000, 28,000. A lot of universities can get really big, particularly at the public level. For a lot of private universities, let's say, like Harvard or Yale, what they'll have is their overall population might be big, but then within those particular schools, they have different colleges. So it's really intricate, but really interesting as well. Now, the academic offerings are going to be different. At a lot of colleges, they are strictly on the undergraduate level only. That can be a lot different depending on where you're going. I know for my college, it was undergraduate mostly, and then they did have a few specialized graduate programs, but a lot of colleges are specifically for undergrad students, whereas with university, most universities in this country offer both undergraduate and graduate programming, and that could include business programming, law school, medical school, all those different things. There are some that do not, but just kind of keeping in mind that that is a big difference. So a lot of students will, let's say, go to a college, and then if they are looking to go to a medical school or a law school or whatever, then they will end up applying to a university. Campus culture is a big one. And like I said, as we go through the different days, we're going to talk about specifically for the different types what the campus culture might be like. But campus culture is a big one for a lot of colleges. Things are much more kind of focused and laser focused just on the academics. At the university level, a lot of times you get a lot more activities and a lot more to be involved with, and things like sororities, all of that stuff. There are obviously colleges that do have those things, but you do find a lot of a difference in who is attracted to a college versus a university here in this country. So just keep all of that in mind as you are thinking about what might be the best place for you based on your personality, based on what you're interested in getting into. Funding status is also important to think about. Now, you are going to kind of hear about this more, but for colleges and private universities, a lot of the funding comes directly from private donors and from people who have decided that they want to give back to the school. Whereas if you're thinking about a community college or a public university, a lot of that money either comes from local government or local taxes, local funding, or from the federal government. So, and from state government as well, because we have lots of different levels of government here in this country. So you have to just think of it that way. And in terms of the way that the schools do different things and the way they operate, it can depend a lot on where they're getting their funding and what is required of them. So just kind of keeping that in mind too. That may not be as important to you as a student, but in some ways it might be, because it also too can impact how much financial aid you may potentially get as an international student. So international students here in the US. So I definitely just want to cover this as well and just think about who are your potential cohorts here in the US as an international student. This information is as up to date as we can get it. It's from 2020, 2021. So I'm sure that it may look a little bit different now, but it's pretty up to date. So the first thing to know is that for the international student level, if you can see here on the screen, nearly 1 million students enrolled. Now, it's debatable that a lot of them were stuck here during everything that happened in 2020. There are probably a lot of students that were able to go home really quickly. We hope so. It may not be the best to be. I don't know. I think about that time a lot and like what it must have been like to be like on a college campus during that time, even though most people ended up going home. But what was it like to sort of be away from everyone, especially if you're an international student? But if you can see here, I mean, that's a lot of students, and this is per annum. Now, I know that in this particular year, as we're looking forward, a lot of students haven't quite come back yet. So that number may be a little bit lower for the 2021-2022 year. But on average, this is how many international students are in the US at any time. This number has only been going up and up. Now, the interesting thing is that a little bit less than half only apply to remain in the country for post-study work. Now, this one has been debated a lot. I know that compared to a lot of other places, let's say like UK, Canada, and other places within Europe, some places within Asia, where a lot of students are really eager to be able to work afterwards. A lot of students who come here to study, what they will do is they actually are, they get the most out of their education and they want to take it right back to their country. I think that there's a lot of reasons behind that. There is, as you would imagine if you heard about anything that the US government does, there's so much red tape around actually getting a visa and then trying to figure out what you're going to do and all the hoops you have to jump through. I feel that a lot of people feel that may not be worth it, but there are a lot of students that, let's say they've done like a great internship somewhere and then they get on really quickly and they're like, yeah, like I think I want to stay behind and work. But that number is a lot lower than a lot of other countries where it's in the 60s and 70s and 80s of students that tend to stay behind after they've finished their post-study to want to work for however long their visa allows. So 1 year, 2 year, whatever that looks like. In terms of the countries that are represented, this is not really surprising to me just based on the students that I work with, but if you are interested, the countries that are typically represented on our college and university campuses here in the US for international students are the top 5 are China, India, South Korea, Canada, and Saudi Arabia. So these lead in the totals of just across the country, no matter where you kind of go, that a lot of students from these particular places are coming from there. And that definitely rings true, whether you're thinking about exchange programs or students who are coming to get full degrees, that it's not very surprising. You don't find as many students who are from, let's say, the UK or from Europe, because again, they have universities that are either mostly free or free. And a lot of times they just don't, depending on kind of where they're coming from and what their expectations are, a lot of them may not go to university, or they may go to university a little bit later, whereas a lot of these countries listed here, they tend to follow the path of America of you need to go to university, you need to get into this field, blah, blah, blah. And so it makes a lot more sense. And if you're thinking about the types of fields that they're going into, it also matches up as well, because we know that these particular fields are only expanding and growing in interest within the countries mentioned. So STEM fields, healthcare, and life sciences are the most popular for international students who are doing undergrad. And then for graduate school, a lot of students like to come here for medicine, for law, and then for advanced science and different things like that. So it's really interesting to just kind of think about where international students are coming from, and just kind of knowing if you are an international student who wants to come here, where you might meet a lot more people from. I did want to point out as well that 1 in every 3 international students receive financial aid. So if that is something that you're interested in, I have done some videos about financial aid for international students on my channel, and we will talk more about that in this series as well. But it is still possible. The route that a lot of American students take is not the one that you will be taking per se, but there is availability for some aid. I think that there's this overall perception that every student who comes to the U.S. from outside of the U.S. is just loaded with money, and they have all this access to all these different things. In a lot of ways, a lot of international students can be less price sensitive, but their families and whoever else, they still want them to be able to get as much aid as they can, because it's so expensive compared to where they came from. So just keeping in mind that there is an opportunity to get aid if you need it. So where do these international students go? This is another question that people always want to know. So as you would imagine, I don't think it's any surprise that as pop culture dictates, now I will just say that things look a lot different in New York and California in the movies than they do in real life. I can attest to that. Those are places that I have both lived. But overall, the 2 places that everyone around the world knows in America, New York, California. But you'd be surprised that a lot of people go into the interior as well. So Texas, Illinois, Florida, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan. There's a lot of places along that corridor of what we call the Rust Belt that a lot of students go. South Carolina is another one in the South. That's a little bit closer to Florida and Georgia, obviously. Kansas is one that a lot of people like to go to. South Dakota, North Dakota. Alaska is also one. I always find that very interesting because, first of all, a lot of us in what we call the lower 48, so who kind of live on the mainland of the U.S., don't get over to Alaska. So I'm always fascinated when I connect with a lot of schools in Alaska who are like, yeah, we have huge population of international students. I'm like, that's interesting that they would choose to go to Alaska. But there's lots of great things about Alaska, but it's really fascinating to me because there's a lot of us who have never made it over to Alaska who have lived here. So I find that really fascinating. And it's also really cold, which I love. But if you're coming from a place like Saudi Arabia, maybe you do want to just jump into negative 40 degrees for the next 6 months. I actually like that. I think that takes a lot of spirit. So this is where a lot of international students are going, but just keeping in mind that every state within the country, including Alaska and Hawaii, have international students in there. So no matter where you're trying to go, there's a lot of opportunities. And there really is a lot of focus, even in schools where you wouldn't think, let's say like University of Utah, where it is predominantly kind of a homogenous state, but they do have a lot of international students that they welcome in. So just kind of think about the fact that no matter where you want to go in the US, there's going to be an opportunity for you. So why these locations? I did just want to point out that specifically with the locations that were listed before, There are reasons for that. So the first reason is that there's a wide range of program options. So depending on what these students are actually looking for at the colleges and universities in these particular states, there's a lot of different options. Overall as well, the lifestyle options, so depending on what they may be looking for, if they're looking to go to a larger school or a school that is located to a big city but maybe just a few minutes away, that there's a lot of opportunity to do that. And then I think that this is probably one of the most important ones, is options for after graduation. So being able to easily find a job, be able to find an internship, whatever you're looking for. In a lot of these states that were listed, a lot of international students are able to do that with ease. And so that's probably where a huge amount of that 45% are usually located after they graduate. So it's really important to think about that as well. So in closing for day one, I hope that you have at least maybe learned a bit more. I'm sure that you have done a lot of research, but you've learned a bit more about the higher education system here in America, and that you are still getting really excited as you look forward to applying for your college or university. Tomorrow, we are going to be talking about public universities specifically. I want to start there as a baseline for you, and then we will move into other types. So I look forward to seeing you tomorrow, where we're going to be talking about public universities here in the United States. I will see you tomorrow for the next one.